Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A pedigree cat in good hands. Age 9 years. She's a mountain cat. Eats premium dry food. Call the number. Maria shuddered. She was so struck by the photo of a white cat, which looked from the phone screen with the eyes of her favorite. The cat Shirley, with whom the girl was inseparable since childhood, recently died, and the cat in the picture was incredibly like him. The girl read the ad again, then gazed at the image of the kitty, thought and dialed the indicated number. Hello, hello. I'm calling from the ad about your cat. I'd love to see her. You see, she looks just like my dead cat. You'd think we cloned him. Hello, you're welcome to visit us anytime. The woman on the other end of the line had a nice, low-pitched voice. I think you'll like my Marquesa. She's very smart. Maria noticed that the woman seemed sad or tired. It turned out to be a short drive right halfway to Maria's work. Arranged a time to meet. Maria didn't want to put things off and drove to the specified address right after work the very next day. A strange excitement swept over her, as if meeting someone else's cat was something special and decisive. When she found the right entrance, she stood for a minute, inhaled deeply and resolutely went inside. There was a tiny rug by the door of the red apartment. It was clean. She pressed the bell, and a very thin woman of small stature opened the door. Good evening. It's me, Maria. You remember from the ad? Yes, of course. Come in, please. I invited a guest. The woman walked forward. Maria noted that her gait was not firm, like a completely alive person, an underground atom of the corridor. Passed into the room. In a small apartment of the old type stood hospital sterility and emptiness. No furniture, no appliances hung on the chairs or scattered clothes not personal without girls, or those not too necessary things, which and promolu dwelling coziness. Even the curtains on the windows looked poor and temporary. From some cheap and frivolous matter, this house would appear uninhabitable. If his mistress in a white kerchief had not sat down opposite Maria on a small sofa, having previously made an inviting gesture not without shyness. Maria looked at her. That looked haggard, bloodless face, as if the countenance from an icon, make yourself comfortable, said meanwhile the woman Adriana, and here is our Marquise. She let her hand to Maria immediately at the entrance, already saw this incredible picture. The large white cat was sitting on the only chair by the sofa where the hostess and Maria were sitting. She looked like a majestic statue. The void around it especially enhanced the impression. The cat looked at the girl, studying it first, and then shifted her gaze to the woman in the headscarf, as if demanding an explanation from her. Maria, too, was scrutinizing Marquise. Hello, Marquise, she said. Quiet. You are very beautiful. Tears came to her eyes, and the girl was silent. Adriana nodded understandingly, pulling herself together. Maria turned to her. Are you leaving, or? She smiled sadly, but it could be taken that way. She remained silent for a moment. It was evident that the explanation was not easy for her. I love her very much, but Adriana slowly pulled the headscarf off her head and exposed a completely smooth skull. Oncology. The last course of chemotherapy was in vain. There's no point in having surgery. Not 6 months left. Maria, stunned, remained silent. That's why her voice is so awful, her face so pale. That's what the scarf hides. What can I say? You know, I've grown tired of the thought. Adriana went on. Is it true that one gets used to everything? At first, the news is like a lightning strike, and then you have to get on with your life. You can't go to the coffin alive. She grinned bitterly. The two women felt sympathy for each other from the first words and continued to talk about some unimportant things. Strangers seemed to have nothing in common. But two lonely people needed warm companionship. Meanwhile, Marquise jumped from her chair and approached them, lost her feet Adriana, then raised her muzzle to Maria and flashed. Friends, Adriana predicted and smiled. But you know, Maria, it's complicated. I think you'll understand. I have to go to the hospital soon. Until then, I'd like to keep Marcus with me for 2 weeks. Do you mind? And you'll come over after work. You'll get used to each other. Of course I don't mind. Let him stay, of course. Maria left to visit her new friend and her cat during the agreed time. She was anxious, but at the same time lightened up after this meeting. This evening filled her with memories. With all her heart sympathizing with Adriana, she involuntarily compared her fate with someone else's. Thought of loneliness. The girl realized that attachment to an animal is not a bliss, not the whim of a sick person. Her cat Shirley, who had literally grown up with her in her old age, had become quite infirm. Coming in the evening from the realtor's office, where she worked as a lawyer to formalize transactions, Maria, sadly looking into his sad eyes, watched almost human clumsy movements, his paws, which Soen wanted to call pedagogical. And no vitamins could help him anymore. Veterinarian, to which Maria in despair took the pet, only sympathetically sighed and offered, "Well, Davabushka, your cat is still long-lived. I am not God, and give him a second life cannot, but to alleviate his suffering can." He cast a glance at Maria, whose eyes rolled involuntary tears. "It'll be easier for you. One injection, and the patient will go into a soft, eternal sleep. Believe me, it's the best thing we can do for him." Maria refused. She walked home. The two of them stoically endured the difficult months, without words understanding each other. The cat lay there exhausted, not wanting to eat. He wouldn't eat. Only his gaze was understanding or goodbye. The girl cried, turning away. She was sure that Fluff would feel her despair if she showed him her tears. And one evening, when the mistress came home, found her Fluffy. The comrade had already calmed down for good, as if he tried to ease the suffering of his mistress. Maria spared neither strength nor time to take the fragmented and lost soft on the left pet's body to a distant abandoned house to bury him near her favorite lilac bushes, where once long ago they had spent many happy hours with the whole family. She was left all alone. The girl was coming back from the half-destroyed fence of the old dacha, limping a little and talking to herself. Now there was no one to talk to. We have to do something. We have to live somehow. Somebody's cat and somebody's best friend. It's not my fault I'm alone. I've got to live. So talking to herself, she reached the entrance, where the train stopped under the clatter of wheels and conversations. She looked out the dirty window and decided to take the cat. In the province, a lonely person can be seen at once. Neighbors know almost everything about him, everyone in sight. The fate of a loner in a big city is unenviable, especially if the character of the person is peculiar. Maria was a kind and intelligent girl, but a childhood trauma left her with a slight, almost imperceptible literacy on one leg. And here with this complex, she never managed to cope in the distant youth of a romantic young lady. She had the misfortune to fall in love with a kid from the neighborhood, Ethan, black hair and swarthy. He looked like a gypsy. He had incredible charm. They call it charisma nowadays. He was a gung-ho, desperate soccer player. A couple of yard games have not left yet, and Maria could stealthily watch the boys, pretending that she was interested in the game and not one of the players. Girlfriends and petite boys were squealing, yelling. Maria, too, was in this crowd of admirers and caught Ethan's every move. Dark-skinned bodies took off in a run. The boy's supple torso was a source of admiration. Ethan was always surrounded by a crowd of younger kids. He was their idol. I don't know his character or his habits. Ethan. Maria fell in love just with his appearance, so lively, filled with vitality. Boyish face with dark eyebrows, was thin and spiritualized. In moments of play or lively conversation, Maria wanted to stare at him and just admire him. She stood at the window overlooking Ethan's driveway for a long time, trying to track his exit and jump out as if to the neighboring department store for groceries, exactly at the moment when Ethan would approach her house. Too often, she started to get in the way of the boy. At 13, girls still do not know the sense of proportion. What can I do? Hey, you. He called out to her one day. What's your name? Maria felt like she'd been doused with ice water. That's the moment when the boy he adored noticed her. But as he noticed, just her temple. She was the one who ran straight home and didn't even cry, only stopped looking in Ethan's direction. After that, the girl would run through the yard as quickly as possible. If there was a soccer game, Maria never let herself think about men again. Complexes acquired in adolescence often remain in a person for life. Her parents were a late child, and they looked upon her as a child. Not really that, delving into her mental space, her childhood crush remained unnoticed by anyone. And brought up on books, Maria closed herself off in a cozy hallway of music and novels of household chores near her mother. "Daughter, don't you want to go to the movies?" her mother Wendy asked her. And our savings bank girls told us a new movie is going on. People are coming in droves. Being aware of the news from her young colleagues, the old lady began to worry that her daughter was always alone. She felt somewhat guilty about the time Maria fell off her bike and hurt her leg. Although Wendy and her husband had then done everything possible for their daughter, her mother's heart ached. Of course, the blame for the aftermath fell entirely on the doctors who sent them home after surgery and treatment, saying it would all go away in time. Working out, sea, sun, and good nutrition will help. The elderly couple took their daughter to the sea as they lived frugally and could spend for the sake of her health, and nutrition was out of the question. All the best, Maria. All in all, Maria was the one unique flower in the family garden. Wendy herself married quite late for the daughters still, and the girl's daughter spoke parents for their good modest accountant, who until 40 years old took care of his sick mother and remained single. The new family took shape. The spouses were completely satisfied with each other. The birth of a daughter was a happiness, unexpected and almost unreal. Therefore, Maria father unconditionally just adored, and Wendy even allowed herself to dream of grandchildren. Having successfully graduated from the law school of the local university, Maria began to work, changed several places. She took root, oddly enough, in a noisy and crowded real estate company, helping employees and clients in drawing up documents and guiding them through the authorities. Screening girls, young boys running through the office, were workmates, but nothing more. Maria was like something out of the last century. Big gray eyes, dark waves, hair, and a tall, slender figure. But the main thing, of course, was in her main movements and manner of holding herself, as if she had just stepped out of a picture of the life of counts and countesses. Hence the coldness and restraint of her kept her from coming too near. She was always on a first-name basis with people. At arm's length, the life of the family flowed peacefully and softly. Parents very quickly, one after another, departed into the next world. Very modest, inconspicuous people who carried their responsibilities all their lives as they should. And when they grew old, just as obediently and peacefully passed away one after another, as if they were tied. So Maria stayed with Pushkin and lived quietly, not suffering from the lack of relatives and friends. After all, there was a good friend from early childhood, and gave her their warmth and affection. Now she had a new relationship ahead of her. Maria ran to Adriana a day or two later. "Hello, Adriana. It's Maria. Can I come by again tonight?" she called before leaving her office. It was always like this. Rada treated her to tea from her meager stock. Maria, seeing the embarrassment of her new friend's position, brought her a little so as not to embarrass her. She was an excellent worker and earned quite well for her position. Deals were made a lot, despite the crises and cataclysms that abounded in the last 10 years, and a good lawyer. Both clients and realtors appreciated, but each time the guest was convinced not in the horse's fodder. Adriana ate like a bird, and most often she had no appetite at all. The only food she accepted with joy was food for her favorite cat. Here Maria did not skimp on the most premium. Oh, how timely just sprinkled her last. Adriana's eyes lit up at the sight of a bag for Marquise. The woman immediately looked away in embarrassment, embarrassed by her poverty and not admitting to it. The Marquise should get used to me. Maybe she'll realize I'm not unhealthy and will accept food from me, Maria explained to her innkeeper, smiling at Adriana. She didn't want to embarrass the sick. "And where did you get such a gorgeous cat?" she inquired. Adriana smiled weakly. It was evident that the memory pleased her. "Oh, that's a very interesting story," she stretched out, "and funny and reddish," and at the same time she was silent, recovering in her memory the details of that long-ago day. There was always music playing in our house. Parents were different. Sometimes they partied till they dropped. Sometimes my mom liked to cry, even cry, finding some far-fetched reasons. Mom had no reason to cry, I assure you, Maria. Daddy worshipped her, but Mommy was a real Carmen. You know, hot, passionate, and terribly, terribly jealous. And my parents loved to go to the theater and were regulars at Philharmonic concerts. And Dad had the misfortune to praise one of our local singers. She sang the main parts. She had a beautiful voice. Her name was Molly. Mom, of course, had to show her temper. She made a scene. It was only at home that my sister and I laughed. But Daddy wasn't laughing. It was Mom's way of asserting herself, you see. It may have looked silly from the outside, but Mommy knew what she was doing. Our intelligent, mild-mannered Daddy was also asserting his own importance. What about such a beautiful girl? His wife is jealous of him, and even to whom the prima donna of the opera stage. It means that he is worth it. That means he's a real man. My God, how touching they were in their funny quarrels. And how did they make up afterward? Dad would sneak in a huge bouquet. Mom was starting to play the role of the perfect hostess who never was and suffered solely on Dad's orders. Adriana's bloodless face became lively at the telling of the story. It was felt that she was oblivious and distracted from her painful condition. Memories of her loved ones gave her strength. Only breathing was difficult. The woman took breaks to take a break from her emotional narrative. And then Mom went quite far in her marital zeal, wanting to prove that she was ready to do anything for Dad. Suddenly, she herself offered to approach that singer and present her with a bouquet. Dad was confused, but he couldn't contradict Mom. You know, the husband's a tomboy. It's great for the family and the kids. After all, in the main, Daddy never conceded to anyone in the work in friendship. And in his love for Mom, he was faithful. He acted only according to his beliefs and principles. And here they are, Mom, with an important look Dad with a gorgeous bouquet go after the performance in the restroom of the actress. And there's not a single admirer at the door. Not even the most pathetic bouquet under the door. The actress, in whose honor just exploded with applause. The hall sat in a corner, alone holding a cute little white kitty on her lap and wiping her tears. It turned out that the other day Molly leaves to her husband in Israel. Planned her benefit, but the wife of the chief director of mediocrity and envy of nice did not want Molly to receive a farewell ovation. She secretly warned all the servants of the theater, who bribed, who simply frightened of dismissal, and the servants simply put the intended prima, bouquets, and baskets in the backyard. Not only that, intrigue, I hope, after the departure of Warshawskaya to get her role by intrigues, achieved the cancellation of the benefit actress, telling about it completely strangers to her people. Burst into tears on the shoulder of our mother. And the daughter. My God, how is she? How are you? Yes, you are a golden voice, my dear Mommy, hugged and sobbed with her. Daddy did not know how to calm this couple drowning in tears, but called someone from the closet and asked to bring champagne from the cupboard. When the parents came home at midnight, and the best friend of the singer's mother, Antu Warshawski, at her mother's arms, sat that same white kitty, and left her living mascot. A new soulful friend, so we had Marquise. Mommy, with her inherent passion, was raring to fight, and this time was supported by both Daddy and us. She arranged a grandiose scandal in the theater, disgraced the mean wife of the editor-in-chief for the whole city. But it was too late. Molly didn't leave from the community window. We loved her so much. You see how she's become just a marquesa. Now she reminds us of three good people. Idea, who also recently passed away, and her parents. And this is why I love her so much and cherish Adriana. You could see it in her ever-changing breasts and that breathing. But her eyes were shining. A smile never left her lips. It was the first time I saw her so lively, almost cheerful, and I was glad of it. I can no longer provide her with the same care as before. Adriana repented. You see, Maria, it's empty. Well, I still have the strength to sell everything I had. I want to leave behind a vacant apartment so I don't have to go to the trouble of selling it. You have to face the truth. Are you a very strong person, Adriana? Said Maria, lowering her eyes. Very decent. That's the whole story of our family, said Adriana. The family is gone, and the story is over. Her pale lips even shifted slightly into the semblance of a smile. And my life will soon be over. I'd like to end it in a nice way, but nothing comes to mind. And I don't have the strength, let alone the means. Edward wanted to leave Andrew some money. He was worried about the apartment being so empty. But my boy, well done, he didn't take it. He's too much of an honest, selfless man, like everyone else in the family. But I'm glad that at least my apartment will remain to my nephew. He will sell it anyway, to expand the housing in my town. It's probably the least I can do to thank him. A pure soul. How does he take care of me? He's been the only one who's kept me going these last few years. Isn't he going to move in with you? I asked Maria. He's still working after graduation. And to live with a sick aunt is not the greatest happiness. I'm even glad he won't have time to do it. The stuff and the apartment is all that. That's not the main thing, but I was so scared about Marcus. I love her more than anything in the world. She's a cat, the only creature dear to me. Marquise has been with me all through my illness. Can you imagine? She comforted me, laid next to me on my sore spot after chemo. And when I was literally turned inside out, guarded me by the bathroom door, only calmed down when I crawled out of there powerless and delirious to the point of bed. And the hospital was waiting for me. Now I will be calm for my beautiful girl. You will certainly not offend her. The cat looked attentively at the two women and calmly lay in its usual place, as if it fully understood their conversation and sympathized with them. It smelled cozy and warm. Maria began to approach the cat more and more often, who was already allowing the stranger to pet herself. When people have little time to socialize and all the deadlines are shortened, they get closer much faster than in normal life. Adriana was in a hurry. She wanted to talk about her own. The young girl turned out to be a soulful and attentive listener. Gradually, she got to know Adriana's story completely. Young Adriana came to the city to study. She lived with her older sister and brother-in-law, who were already well settled here, working and raising a sweet son. Adriana adored her nephew's baby, and he reciprocated. But what can be said? But to sit on each other's heads in a small apartment of young spouses, and even with a small child, was shameful. 6 months later, Adriana moved into a student dormitory. Why are you leaving? Her sister resented her. Anna is as thin and white as Adriana. I have hot soup at home anytime. There's a balcony for you. Please, Jacob, you tell her. She addressed her husband, who was as young as she was. He was totally immersed in his favorite job. Not much at home, of course. Technical high school teacher, not even a school teacher. He was required to immerse himself in 2 areas at once: educating children and organizing scientific work and practice with them. Jacob came tired and did not really get involved in domestic affairs, but the recovery of the body needed, and he in good conscience, admittedly, would be happy to more often visit his favorite wife in the marital bed. And secretly, he was also waiting for his student to move in. It's a young business. Stay. Hold the young husband, but not too convincingly. She did, and I didn't regret it at all. Whoever hasn't lived in such a town is not a student. A girl from the provinces had an easy disposition. She excelled in her studies. But most of all, she was attracted to the section of tourism, in which there were many strong and as cheerful as herself. Boys and girls, especially guys. One of them caught her eye. Tall, a head taller than Adriana herself, mighty blonde. The name Edward seemed strange, but it didn't fit a regular guy with big hands and obviously familiar with a shovel paddle, or even a hunting rifle. And he's like a normal student in general. Quietly questioned Adriana his classmates, as everyone answered her. In his studies, of course, he was diligent and hardworking, but sometimes he would give away an idea. Last week, I offered to replace one tricky thing in the cleaning on the machine, and it worked like a charm. Imagine, even our professor was surprised he didn't think of it himself. And really this one, as he was called by his friends, gave out a proposal, which was so eager to try and practice. Technical University. But even here, such bright heads are not often found. And in the student trial gathered a core of the same thorough, thoughtful guys. No one was surprised when later they stayed together and set up the production of household appliances. During camping trips, it was often Adriana who found herself next to him. Or maybe she was the one who inadvertently fell into his arms. He was so big and handsome. He seemed strong and dependable. In fact, he was. No, he wasn't. The tough guy would stop the newcomer and go to fix a peg for the tent. And that's how he tried it. Took a knife from his buddy and showed him how to pinch small chips and dry wood to quickly start a fire. And when he ruled a sprain with one sharp movement, on the mountain trail along the very line, he became almost a god to her. She had stayed up all night, grateful, remembering the warmth of his hands on her ankle and reimagining his hair in front of her. Her leg ached, but she could still make out his curls. It must be true what they say about the rescue becoming special to the one who saved him. And so it was with Adriana. He was now taking her everywhere. He could call out to her from afar. "The hard route ran over your leg today. You hear that? Well, it's axe porridge today." He teased her when it was her turn to make porridge. So gradually, imperceptibly, he became closer and closer. She sang and couldn't believe her happiness. However, she did not give any sign by the end of the hike. The comrades, who noticed their not quite usual affection for each other, began to shout them both these jars. It was exactly affection, because they walked together as if attached to each other. And the two bright heads were always glimpsing each other. "When will you call me to the wedding?" The sacramental question was finally asked at the end of the hike. "Oh, really? What wedding?" Adriana blushed. "Here, lie down. Order a cafe and we'll call you there." Edward joked. There was no wedding. What kind of wedding for students? But we went to the registry office. They drank champagne to the guitar, sang, and had fun. Soon, Edward graduated from the institute, and a year later, Adriana and Edward defended themselves, got their diplomas, rented a place to live, and started a modest, as in student life. Instead of a couple at the institute, they worked in their cooperative, as it was then customary to call a private enterprise, no matter how big or small. Edward turned out to be not such a strong technical genius, as it seemed in his student days. But he got to know such good fellows who could do incredible things in a couple of days. His decency and responsibility impressed almost everyone who was acquainted with him. And when he made his case for cooperation, many of that old guard willingly went. Their time had come precisely at the moment when industrial production was being destroyed in the country. The adventurism of youth, bringing friends together. An idea. The gusto and fervor were not yet wasted. The forces moved them. How brave are young people who do not assume failure and oblomov. This ignorance allows them to act without regard to authority. "Listen, old man, we're solving a question. You should run up. No one can solve it but you understand? It's a matter of honor, old man." And the old man drove, walked, called back. Even though Edward never promised him anything, never lured him in, he was just a man of action. Talents flocked like butterflies to the light. They all wanted to do the real thing, to break a sweat. They wanted to give it their all. They wanted it to be interesting. So that steam would come out of your ears, and then a sigh of relief would burst out of your chest. "We found it. We did it." Ed said. "What did you do to lure me in, tell me?" "I mean, he's a talent. He'll win the Nobel Prize if he puts his inventions together and shows them off. And you keep him in a chicken coop where he can't breathe." "I'm not thinking, I'm thinking." "You don't understand anything about sausage trimmings," Googled Ed, grabbing his little wife by the shoulders and putting her in front of him. "He didn't come to the office. He's come to us, understand?" "Well, how do you want it? And people shouldn't be working under these conditions." Adriana spoke. "Let's calculate how much we need for new windows. Furniture again to renew. Well, these computers are state-of-the-art. They're standing on shabby, almost dumpy desks. Come on, I'll order them tomorrow. Sign right here. That's scratching my thick hair. Signing sometimes with elephants. What's a dump? Adriana, for God's sake. Your son-in-law took them from the school desks. At least don't say that to him. My sister's husband really did spend years directing the floor at a vocational college, and on an acquaintance helped and written off from the risky desks of his. How to resist the kinder charm? The two families lived amicably, meeting at the dinner table on holidays. But not so long ago, Anna and Jacob moved to a neighboring town, where their son studied at the institute. Adriana, although she was not in the specialty of the accounting center, from the first days was engaged in the payroll of employees and other small matters, to which Edward did not reach hands. A woman's eye sees the world differently, and sometimes the wife could notice Edward's nose and his shortcomings, which he marveled at. Wow, I wouldn't have realized. The years went by, then flew by, and they were the same amorous little panic, head to head, solving life's problems on vacation. The spouses would go hiking for old memories, mastering the most difficult routes. One day, they had to interrupt the hike at the most unexpected moment. The son-in-law had a heart attack. He died overnight. My nephew was only in his first year of study, no comrades, no life experience. The sister in the new town had no time to recognize anyone. In addition, in the terrible grief of confusion, the funeral chores fell on Edward's shoulders. Adriana comforted her sister as best she could. "You want us to take you back. We'll find you a comfortable apartment. You'll get a job. There's always a part-time job at Edward's office. You'll be fine, Anna. I can't go back there. Don't you understand?" I was in tears. "Anna, every time I see you, my heart bleeds for the good times we had. Why did you ever think of moving? He could have worked at his college. Quietly. No, he's got to go into manufacturing. These plans are stressful." And Anna cried again and reread, unable to talk about anything else. Edward had gone home. Business was not waiting. Adriana stayed behind to help her sister and support her at least for the first time. She was well aware that Jacob had no chance of survival. That was what the doctors had explained after the autopsy. It was such a case that a heart defect does not manifest itself in any way during a person's lifetime, and it is impossible to be saved from its manifestation without knowing about it in advance. Anna, however, did not want to hear this. She fixated on unbelievable options to save her husband and blamed herself. She took almost all her sister's worries upon herself and held awake for 9 days as she remained indifferent. Why was Anna saying all this? Would it bring Jacob back? I started crying again. It was also impossible to sort out the dead man's personal belongings in front of her. She would just get hysterical. Adriana and Andrew tried to deal with this burdensome matter as quickly as possible. When did Anna go to the cemetery? She went to Jacob's grave every day and came back in tears. Neither her son nor her sister could resist. How can you keep a man from love? A trifle to the dead. No matter how much I try to help, but everyone must survive the death of a loved one himself. Adriana had work waiting for her. Edward could use the support and care of his wife, and here Anna must come out of her depression in time, and the absence of her sister will only be to her benefit. Otherwise, she will live in her fragile shell of grief, not taking in any worries from a fellow's determination and concern for the student's son. If Andrew does not break through this wall between mother and everyday life, then no one else will. That was what Adriana assumed. With a heavy heart, she left her 2 loved ones. But now lonely people, long conversations, and doing things together with her nephew had brought them even closer together. And now Adriana made daily calls not only to her sister, but also to Andrew. "Oh, Aunt Adriana," Andrew lamented. "Mom is unrecognizable. She's turning into an old lady. Now she's started going to church. Can you imagine? Praying, baptizing. She even smells like someone else's heavy odor. I don't know what to do." They say that daughters often repeat the fate of their sister's mother, Adriana. Anna exactly repeated the death of her husband, drove her into such depression that the woman began to melt before her eyes. The son did not know how to make his mother enjoy life. Moving mother became lethargic, without initiative. Everything was falling out of her hands. Constant gloomy mood and helplessness possessed her. So the weeks dragged on for months. At first, Anna hardly went to work. It distracted her a little and kept her going. But one day came when she simply did not get up in the morning. The doctor, who was called by her exhausted son, gave a referral for tests. But in the morning, the mother lay listless and didn't want to get up. Andrew called his aunt and son-in-law. Immediately, the relatives arrived and were amazed at how much Anna had given up. She was almost an old woman with a faded look, dressed in anything. She spent most of her time in silence, sitting somewhere and looking at herself. Shocked, the couple decided that they would come every weekend, wasting their energy and money on a short trip. As soon as the work week was over, Adriana and Edward drove to Anna's house, taking her out to a restaurant in the countryside. Her sister even began to smile when she remembered the childish pranks or words of little Andrew. But no matter what her loved ones did for her, then Anna returned again and again to her once again private state. Soon things got even worse. Anna began to fall down on the spot. "Son, I can't see anything." With horror, she said to Andrew when he came back from class and hurriedly prepared lunch, "Would you at least read me what is written in the newspapers?" But then Veda was forgotten again and sat aloof in thoughts unknown to the boy. In the meantime, her son was doing his best, growing older and stronger, calling the line, and in an almost rapturous voice his aunt said, "I got a part-time job in a restaurant as a waiter. Sometimes I get tips. I'd really like to continue. Thank you, Uncle Edward, for your help, of course. But I like to have more fun. I'm not the only one here. There's more of us." Andrew's voice sounded cheerful, and he didn't want to object. Let the boy husband decided to marry the money that Edward sent. Of course, enough. But Andrew was a man. He dreamed of independence. Turns out he was too early for that. Soon the part-time jobs were gone. His mother's health required his constant attention. It was clear that it was not depression. Soon Anna was admitted to the hospital. A terrible thing was revealed. They found a tumor in the brain, which was pressing on the optic nerves. The disease progressed so quickly that there was no point in surgery. Within 2 months, Anna was literally burnt out. It was not clear whether it was because of the disease that she became depressed or because of her worries after the death of her husband. The tumor developed so quickly. Andrew was left without a father and mother, and it was necessary to finish his studies. Andrew told him, "Edward, study hard, don't think about bad things. You can't get your parents back. You have a life to live, and you must live successfully and happily," Adriana added. "Yes, I must. Happily," Edward confirmed seriously. "Don't worry about money. We'll also send you the amount you need. Finish your studies. Welcome to our company. In the meantime, all weekends and vacations are waiting for you. And once again, we'll be traveling with sad worries. Again, the packing up of the closest person. Memorial tables, candles." Adriana found it very difficult. Even more painful for Andrew. Without a family, her favorite boy, so kind, so tenacious, so diligent. "Andrew, it's okay. You know, when kids bury their parents. It's when parents have to lose their kids. That's terrible. So take it for what it's worth. Well, some people have to do it sooner. Some people have to do it later." She kissed him on the top of his head, tilted his fair head toward her, and tried not to cry. If only he had a girl, it wouldn't be so depressing to leave. But no, he'd given himself to taking care of his mother. He had no time for relationships. "Yes, I understand. Aunt Adriana, I'm fine." Andrew calmed her down and hid his eyes too. Now they understood a lot about their mother's and sister's behavior, but there was nothing they could do. Adriana tried as much as possible to give her nephew the warmth he received from his mother. How unfortunate it was for the nephew. The couple had to go to their home. They could not live because of the young man. They could not talk in the evenings about anything but Anna's death. Maybe it was a fatal mistake. Adriana wondered aloud. Maybe Anna should have gone back. At least here, we're already settled, both people and town. Adriana will take her death anyway. Edward said sadly, "You realize that, don't you? She'll wait until you're in the fall. She will deceive, but she will steal the one who must die on this day at this hour. You can explain it however you want." Yes, Adriana understood. She thought again of her mother, who couldn't get over her husband's death. Her parents were not a quiet, friendly couple. Their relationship was reminiscent of Italian movies. The jealous mom was always suspicious of her father, calling back to work if he was running late. The father was patient and silent for a long time. Then he exploded. The girls, Anna and Adriana, would cover their ears. Then the parents, as if nothing had happened, decided to go to the theater, to visit, or to a banquet, quickly packed up and left for the South, entrusting their daughters with an independent existence. The girls laughed at their parents' eccentricities, because they knew how they adore each other's first words when Dad returned from work were, "Where's Mom? Is she home?" Mother, taking off her shoes in the hallway, already asked, "Where's Daddy already come?" And when the father fell under the car drunk, slack-jawed, the mother barely lived without him for a year, then quietly died in her sleep, not giving trouble to her daughters. It seems that with the death of her husband, she completely lost the source of life, did not raise her voice, did not show any passion, and was a smooth, boring aunt. And she hadn't even retired yet. If Anna didn't have Adriana and Adriana didn't have Anna, it's hard to imagine how they would have borne the loss of their parents. Everyone. Sisterly attachment is stronger than the closest friendship. After all, sisters have known each other all their lives, ever since the youngest of them was born. And now Adriana's nephew, Andrew, was second only to her husband. Adriana herself was not given a child by God. In their youth, the couple did not suffer about it at all. They had enough of each other's company. They were never bored. So many interesting things around, so many topics for conversation and discussion. The most interesting thing was that they were together or near each other day and night. But never did Adriana have the urge to move away from her husband of what is called long married ladies to take a break from him. Apparently Edward felt the same way. "You're not bored with me?" Adriana asked him. "You've got such smart men in your office. I'm not much good." "You have such smart men in your office." Edward laughed. "And I'm not so good here either." He would approach her with rags, blonde hair, and say, "How much paint waste at other wives to paint gray hair, and we save money. And the main thing is that it's forever. Where will we spend the savings?" The wife was picking up on it. "Come on, Andrew, let's buy something fashionable. Let the girls hang on him." "Let them." Edward waved his hand. "Remember, I had sneakers and fancy jeans. If it hadn't been for those clothes, you wouldn't have interfered with me." And they kept teasing each other and goofing off. It was like it hadn't been years since they'd been romantically in love. Life is just as beautiful despite the time. Sunshine, green trees, mountains if you drive a bit in the right direction. When Adriana decided to take her women's health seriously and try her luck, on her birthday, it turned out it was too late for her to worry about it. Perhaps some hereditary reason had played a role. Or maybe the long-distance hikes had produced such a result that children were no longer possible. "All right," Edward waved his hand. When she told him about the unfortunate doctor's visit, not everyone has to be a parent, and not everyone can have one after all. Andrew was being sly. Maybe he just wanted to reassure his wife so she wouldn't have an inferiority complex. Later, Adriana would conjure up this moment many times. But how do you know how the husband really felt? And what good would it do? You can't get back what you've lost. They've traveled to so many countries. It's easier to travel comfortably now, and they still go camping. Like 15 years ago. This summer, Andrew went on an internship. "We'll take advantage of the moment." Suggested to his wife, Edward, "Wherever we've been. Let's go mountain hiking. Look at the route. Oh, that's a whole new direction. It's my dream." Adriana was excited. Light, slim, like a girl. She was pretty and still young-looking. Her health had never let her down until then. But this summer, Lena had a hard time going on a hike. Already on the train, she felt short of air. As she stepped onto the platform, her heart clenched. "You look pale." Edward was worried. "Woman's Day. I don't think so. I'm just being simple-minded." I hastened to refute his suspicions. "Adriana, it'll pass in the air. What's the air like here?" And she put her face to the fresh breeze. The climb up the mountain again brought her difficulty in breathing, and she felt dizzy and dizzy again. It seemed to have passed only a little, but she was already powerless and sat down right on the path on a large boulder. "Let's go down," Edward said sharply. He helped his wife up and dragged her down. The descent took a long time. The couple stopped from time to time so that Adriana could rest. At the bottom, she was put to bed. But her strength recovered too slowly. The injections given by the paramedic on duty did not help. Adriana and Edward were driven to the nearest hospital by random hitchhikers in a large Jeep. Other cars would hardly have been able to travel that way, or rather off-road. Edward spent the night in a chair in the hospital corridor. In the morning, he could hardly wait for the doctor to examine his wife. Alas, the doctor said, "Your wife has something more serious than fatigue or malaise, by the looks of it. I believe a CT scan is required. We don't even have a decent X-ray machine." The elderly doctor sighed and thought about it. "You know what? We'll keep her here for now. We'll help the body gather strength, and you contact a serious medical institution. Then you'll know exactly where you're going, and your wife's trip will be easier. For now, I'd recommend she rest." The frustrated Edward shook the doctor's hand and went to call his relatives, which meant he had almost no time left to look for friends who could help. Calling on all reserves and resources, Edward drove his wife to the regional center and put her in a good clinic. Friends helped. The neuro specialists suspected the same thing from all the symptoms. It was cancer, a death that creeps up and gnaws into the body stealthily, sneakily. After setting aside the time necessary for the examination, Adriana returned home, even though her sister had died of cancer. She so didn't want to believe the damned diagnosis. How could it be? She asked her husband a question for which there was no answer. "I didn't drink, I didn't smoke. I'm perfectly happy in my personal life. I'm doing well at work. It's written that this disease comes from stress and worry." She was sitting down. Sister Anna also thought she was a happy woman. But it happened as it happened. "Lenochka, don't worry." Edward took her hand. "Medicine doesn't stand still. As long as you heal, your body will fight. In the meantime, scientists will come up with a way to finally defeat the disease. We'll fight to the bitter end. We'll beat it." Adriana believed in her husband, otherwise there was no other way to live. He had always been her rock. And now she too felt that she was not alone in the face of the disease. Edward had never given her a reason not to trust him. He had never once in his life failed her in major matters and issues. All decisions were made together in concert, so she threw herself into the fight of her life, drank all possible medicines, used folk remedies, in time to lie down for routine treatment in the hospital. At the same time, she tried to stay awake, to look after herself. In front of my eyes stood the image of a sick sister with faded eyes, waving her hand, and eerily indifferent to her appearance. Adriana loved her husband and wanted to remain for him as desirable and sweet as she had always been. She believed that together they would conquer the disease. Edward was touchingly patient, with her dragging through the hard and dark days. When the disease worsened, weeks of remission came quickly as she took walks, watched movies, read books. Every minute she felt her husband's care unfailing and not intrusive. And then there was always her beloved Marquise nearby. She felt the mistress as no one else. Fluffy friend did not remember the evil, because the owners always left her alone in the cat cattery when they left on a trip or went on a camping trip. But the cat forgave it to people because she was attached to them, and she had already developed an addiction to this mode of existence. She lay down at her mistress's side, rearranged herself on the sore spot, and Callous' soothing purr stroked the fluffy fur at Marquise's side. Adriana was making plans, and that's when she recovered. Thus began her next dreamy evening with Edward. Of course, it wasn't easy for her husband. He had to keep up with work, communicate with the attending Raspberry, doctors, organize appointments for the procedure at home, and cooking, cleaning. I mean, he had to take care of that too. Adriana was helpless at times, and when a little withdrawn, she felt so disgusted with earthly affairs that she wanted to turn to the wall and not see anyone. And again, her favorite Marquise came to her aid. Perhaps those who regard their presence in the house as a healer are right. In any case, on Adriana's soft smile of her cozy creature acted exactly healing. Well, or as happened more and more often, at least soothing. It wasn't like it had been at the beginning of her illness now, when Adriana had dashed to work on good days. What about my boys again? Everything must have smelled like tobacco smoke. And Hope's not mopping the floors well again. I gotta keep an eye on her. It's always a mess in the bathroom. Calm down. My husband laughed. We have no irreplaceable. but immediately faltered under her gaze and coped. But there are unique ones. This is our Adriana. Jenna, your assistant won't do everything, of course. Like you, she's still a little inexperienced, but she's doing fine. So don't worry, rest and regain your strength. I just bought you some vitamins. And he immediately went to the kitchen, called a bunch of rings, and so switched Adriana's attention to some special overseas fruits. Then, seating her in a corner not far from him, he would prepare dinner. He understood how dreary it was for a sick person to be home alone all day without much to do, and often still suffering from nausea and pain. So the first thing he did was to make sure they were in the same room and close to each other in the evenings. Adriana's assistant had been cooking for a long time. It was a young woman, Jenna, from the neighborhood, a widow with a small child. The child was what made her needy, and at the same time could not work full-time, only studied. Formed her part-time, and soon Adriana became convinced that Jenna was diligent in getting into details. She began to trust her with more and more important work. Truth be told, she didn't like it very much. Jenna's manner of talking and loud, annoying laughter. Well, what can you do? It's the new generation. They are so well-mannered and have no complexes, which is also considered to work well and not bad. And still at first Adriana was not worried about her place. No, about the job. Exactly for how they will manage without her. But after all, Edward is well aware of the situation in the office. He reassured her, "You taught yourself the light. And you know very well she's a smart girl. She's trying. So it's all right. We've got a paycheck and a comfortable workplace. You'd think, what else is there?" But recovery didn't come. Periods of good health became less frequent. And in short, the exacerbation of the disease became more frequent and prolonged. Adriana didn't sleep well at night, and from the very beginning of her illness, and asked to be left alone in bed. Her husband moved into the next room without complaint for the night, leaving the door open to hear her if she needed anything. Then the need arose for him to work on some paperwork. When Adriana was well, he was sometimes able to stay late in the workroom. Adriana could walk home alone or go to a cafe with a friend, waiting for him to return for a late dinner. And now he secluded himself in his room. So little by little, the couple began to drift apart. The evenings became quiet. Conversations faded away. What was there to discuss if they didn't go anywhere together, saw nothing, talked to no one? 5 whole years passed in such an environment. A saint would not have been able to endure so long around a sick man. Edward, on the other hand, behaved as always, continued to care for his wife, and was unfailingly even-tempered. Preoccupied with her pain, Adriana never reflected on her husband's behavior, believing it to be as it should be. She took his labors for granted. Sick people are so often selfishly blind to other people's problems. Increasingly, she had to resort to sleeping pills and painkillers. Edward had long ago also handled these himself skillfully, like a professional nurse. Adriana had loved his big, warm hands since her long-ago camping trips. They were the skillful, strong hands of a master of the slain man. Yet the strength in them was special, gentle. Or maybe it seemed that way to Adriana. Today, he was administering her anesthetic. After the injection, the patient lay quietly, turned away as always to the wall, covering her eyelids, listening to what was happening outside. At this time, in the kitchen, where her husband was clearing the table after dinner, his cell phone rang. Edward, in a muffled voice, started the conversation. It became clear who he was talking to: the woman who had come into the company for her Adriana seat. When had she gotten sick? The specifics of the job were so well known to the line that she could guess Edward's interlocutor by 2 or 3 phrases. Yes, this is Jenna, of course, a business conversation. But suddenly his intonation changed, became stealing. Some kind of intimate, barely knowing line. "Well, something sweet," said Edward, muffled by his beautiful baritone. "Everything will be fine. Just a little bit. Be patient tonight." "Of course not. No, I can't. She's asleep for now. But she'll wake up soon." "What are you doing?" I almost shrieked. Edward immediately lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." Kisses. Adriana couldn't understand what this conversation meant. but everything is clear and understandable. Her husband, and it is an uninspired young relationship. But does it happen like that? How is it possible? This is her husband's own, the only one, the first and the last. He's caring and attentive. It's perfect. Adriana didn't bat an eye herself. Her temples pounded. Caring, attentive. Perfect pretended to be asleep until her husband retired to his room for the night. Then she gathered her strength with great exertion, trying not to make noise, dragged from the mezzanine suitcase, with which once in the happy days of the two of them went to Europe. Her husband was breathing evenly and quietly in the next bedroom. She knew his habit, just put his head on the pillow. He sleeps like a dead man. Already calmer, she gathered his things and neatly stacked the suitcases on the in advance took to the kitchen. An empty one for now. I knew that a full one wouldn't lift him, and I couldn't carry it. Looked around once more the closet shelves. But I think I've packed all the essentials. Till Dawn sat in the chair, either in oblivion or in half-drama. But I had no strength to think about what was happening. Grandson crouched, faithful Marquise. Here it was morning heard Edward got up and went to the toilet. Then Adriana rose from her seat and went to the kitchen. She poured water into the kettle and lit the gas burner. "You will not drink tea today," she said as if to herself, but she addressed it to her husband. He had just entered the kitchen, wiping his face and neck with a snow-white towel. "Good morning. How did she sleep? Why are you up so early?" He reached out to kiss her, but Adriana pulled away, and he almost tripped over a suitcase. "What's this?" And immediately his face began to lose its features before Adriana's eyes. It was very frightening to see. There was one man standing in front of her, and half a minute later another, completely lost. Disintegrated. A stranger. He understood everything. "Go away," Adriana said calmly. "I heard your conversation. There's a child in there," he said, after a silence. "The son is 3 years old. Forgive me, I couldn't tell you. It would have been too cruel. Did you hope I would die and not find out?" Adriana asked in a strange voice. "I'm sorry, there's no way I can die. Would you have gotten married then? Go away." Edward silently took his suitcase and left. Adriana looked at him and wondered how this dearly loved man was now suddenly a stranger. How could it be? Could it be that she was in some kind of suspended state? Couldn't help crying and cursing her lovers. She froze and then went to the window, then sat in the chair, mindlessly looking in front of herself. To realize what had happened could not. A day later, I went to the hospital in a very bad condition. "Were you under some kind of stress?" the doctor asked, a pretty, dry woman a little younger than Adriana herself. "Not really." Faintly, Adriana answered, although it was clear from her voice that yes, of course it had been. This time the treatment was very hard and slow. The ambulance was called by a neighbor to take Marcus to the usual place. There was no one. Worried about the cat, which for the first time was left without care and supervision, she called her nephew. "Andrew, try to come. Please. I'm begging you, honey. The cat's all alone in there." I didn't have time to warn anyone. Adriana herself did not understand why now. After so many days of loneliness and patience, large tears rolled down her cheeks. Before, she had been like a dried-up pond with cracks at the bottom of her dark, soulless, dried-up neck. Andrew was upset that the aunt was in the hospital again, and promised to come back soon. He was quite satisfied with the stated business trip. When he asked in surprise where Edward was, his nephew had indeed arrived. He was to not only take care of his aunt, but also to become an operative, to listen to Adriana's heavy account of what had happened. "Aunt Adriana," he said, hugging the slimmed down woman, "you are strong. Do you remember how you took care of Mom? How you explained everything well to her? I can't do that. But you realize you have to live. And your uncle? But let him live once. He can do that. You're right." Adriana supported him warmly. "Let him live. How much he's taken care of me. I should be grateful to him." "Really, Andrew?" She peered inquisitively into the young man's eyes, but he averted his gaze. What could he say? How could he? Answers for a strong adult. Everyone makes his own choices. From that day on, the boy helped his aunt in any way he could. He came to her every time she called. He took care of all the cases that required walking to all sorts of authorities. He was the one who talked to the doctors and delivered the medicine. It was good that he was well regarded by his superiors at his workplace, where he worked for the second year after graduating from the institute. Realizing the need to travel, they let him go, gave him time off. Once Andrew came to bring his aunt from the hospital, he decided to clean up so that the apartment was at least clean. He booed the symbol of the floor. When the doorbell rang, Edward stood on the doorstep. "Hello, Andrew, gloomy." He said hello without expressing surprise. "Hi." Andrew was a little confused. "Don't you have a key?" "I do." "Why not?" Edward took a bunch of keys out of his pocket. "It's just inconvenient. I wanted to return it to the line." "Come on in." Andrew moved aside, clearing the passage. "Here are my floors. Aunt Lena's being discharged tomorrow. I thought I'd freshen the air, so to speak." Edward held himself as stiffly as a guest. It was obvious he was uncomfortable. The conversation wasn't going well. Meanwhile, Andrew put a kettle on the table, put cookies, butter, and tea on the table. Having poured it into cups, he moved the guest and made an inviting gesture. "Come on, let's drink tea." All his movements were practiced. Taking care of his mother had given him the skills of housekeeping. The boy got it. Thought he was still on the prowl himself. And here I am. The boy looked at him uncomprehendingly, but his gaze was so bright and guileless that Edward didn't realize how he'd spoken about it. "You may judge me, of course." He began. "Yes, I am a traitor. Adriana is my only love, but it just so happens that this woman—" He hesitated, but he didn't call the light by name. "Turned out to be pregnant. A chance encounter, fleeting. But she wouldn't let me rest. You see, she wouldn't say a word, but she kept looking at me like that. And I was tired. I got weak. It just happened." Andrew listened silently, keeping his eyes open as Edward sighed heavily and clutched his head with both hands resting on his knees. "And then my son was born, and that was it. I couldn't leave them. It's 3 years now." They sat in silence. Then Andrew said, "Uncle, I'm not your judge. You've always helped me. But I know one thing for sure, Aunt Adriana would never have left you. 5-10 years of her whole life she would have been with you." "I know," Edward almost whispered. "I know. That's why I don't apologize. It's hard." Rising from his chair, he put the keys to the tea beside the cup without touching it. Maria listened to Adriana and realized that she didn't want to remain so lonely by her old age. She already wanted to leave this empty apartment, to start living in a different way, to be light at heart, light in the house. She sympathized with Adriana with all her heart and was ready to help her. And so the day came before the trip to the hospital. Adriana had warned her in advance, and Maria came in the evening with the clear intention of taking the cat home with her. Adriana had also prepared in advance. Maria. Marquise got used to her a long time ago. And here is the rest of the food. True, I haven't been out lately, so it's not much, but I think it's enough for a couple of days. And these are the essentials. These are our Marquise's favorite toys. She put a ball, a rubber mouse, and a couple of other things next to it. The woman says a long goodbye to her pet. She whispers softly in her ear. Only she can hear the words. Then she let her go, and Marquise silently climbed into the carrier. "Well then, we're off," Maria said. Finally, taking the bag of belongings in one hand and the other, she walked toward the exit. "Goodbye, Adriana. Have a good day. I'll be sure to call you." Adriana nodded and turned back to the window, holding back tears. Outside the window, a cold autumn rain was falling in unison with her mood. While Maria was carrying Marquise home, she was soaking wet. Wait. The bus in the rain wasn't very pleasant either, so she decided to do the easier thing. She walked. It was warm and cozy to dry in her apartment anyway. Letting the cat out of the carrier, she said, "Welcome to the new home of Marcus. Now you will be a mistress here to keep order, catch mice. Remember the main thing to remember." Caressing the cat affectionately, she lowered it to the floor and went about her business. She hung up her wet coat and scarf and put her shoes on to dry. Marquise sat by her things at first, Then slowly she began to settle in. She walked around her new home for a long time, looking in all the corners. She did it all in silence. She slept on her own bed, which she had given to Adriana, and from then on she slept only on it. In the morning she went to work. Maria poured her food, poured water, and punished Marcus. "You stay for the mistress." "Agreed." "If anything, my dear, not to me, I'll buy." And left. The new resident got used to the apartment and the mistress not immediately. Maria didn't know how the Marquesa behaved during the day alone in empty rooms. She would go to her office, return early in the morning and in the evening. Always worried. How was Marquesa without her? Does not yearn for the former dwelling on his native mistress, worried about the health of the cat. But coming in the evening, she made sure that she had eaten a little, but enough not to starve and lose weight. She sighed, then cleaned the litter box and took the white Marcus in her arms. "You're my good sweetheart. I know this is hard for you. You're like a flower that's been transplanted into different soil. Mommy didn't betray you, you know that. That's just the way it is. And I'll take care of you. Don't be sad, my good ones. We'll be friends." "Okay." The cat listened and was silent. She hadn't raised her voice once since she'd moved into Maria's apartment. It was strange, confusing, and scary. Maria was worried. Then she decided to calm down and wait. Since the cat was healthy, she didn't show any signs of anxiety. "Why are you so quiet?" I asked. She strokes the soft fur. "That's the kind of Marquesa you eat. I promise you will visit your mommy Marquesa. You just don't get upset." Maria called Adriana several times at the hospital, then sent pictures of Marquise. The woman was very grateful to her, but her voice grew quieter and quieter each time. Several months passed, and then one day close to spring, Maria's call was not answered, nor the next day. Then a man answered the phone. "Hello. Are you calling Aunt Adriana? She's in the hospital. This is her nephew, Andrew." Maria almost shrieked. "This is Maria, a friend of hers. I know she's in the hospital. She's not well." "Hello, Maria. Auntie's gotten worse. She's been unconscious for 2 days." Andrew's voice sounded depressed. "And you've come for a long time. Will you be by her side?" Maria shuffled from foot to foot excitedly and suddenly had a very strong desire to help Adriana. "I took a vacation. Auntie has no one but me," Andrew explained. How could he know that Maria knew about this detail of Adriana's biography? And Maria made up her mind. "Andrew, will you let me visit her? Let's get something for the doctors to let me into the room. It's not like I'm a relative, and I need to see her, reassure her." "Well, let's try a little." Confused from such pressure, Andrew. The girl realized that arguments are necessary. "You see, I have a cat, Adriana Marquesa. I would like to calm her down, tell her about the cat, explain that everything is all right. Maybe it would make her feel better." "Oh, that's what this is about." Andrew was pleased. "You're the girl with the beautiful eyes and the kind heart. I got a reply. She told me about you. Come tomorrow between 2 and 5. I'll tell her you're my fiancé." Maria was embarrassed and confused at the same time. She hadn't expected such compliments, so she could only say, "Thank you until tomorrow." At night, the girl woke up from the fact that in her head from somewhere a vivid picture appeared. In a bright room, she held in her hands a Snow White and a cat, as if the picture had formed. Yes, she must pass to Adriana with the Marcus drive to the hospital. With the cat in the bag was easy. And at the hospital itself, Maria chickened out. She did her best, as visibly as possible, to blink past the grenadier-looking janitor who sat on the passageway to the stairs leading to the rooms for the bedridden. But she was alert, even though there were plenty of visitors. She snatched Maria with a glance and shouted, because apparently she could not speak quietly. "And you, my dear, where are you going?" "To room 202. Maria got agitated again. Thank God, Andrew took care of the pass and called her in advance, warning her that there and there you can get it in hand. Otherwise, the janitor will not let you through. The groom grinned Maria to herself. The Marquise had not failed in the slightest, unaware of the zoo in her bag. The janitor nodded, and Maria began to ascend to the right floor. Here was the lower ward. Quietly opening the door, Maria prepared to see Adriana's dead face. For that reason alone, reality was not listening to her. Adriana lay with her eyes closed. Her mouth was outlined by a thin line of bloodless lips, her breathing almost imperceptibly moving the sheet on her chest. Had there been other patients in the ward, Maria would hardly have been able to recognize the mistress of the Marquesa at once. Thus, she had changed before. Thin and pale, now Adriana's face had quite lost its individual features and had become as if a symbol on Brodsky of the human face. A dream, Maria thought, this is my dream. In the ward, and so completely painted white, was even lighter from the sun, and snow outside the window reigned here impersonal, without life nobility frightening with its perfect network. She had to get used to it first. Maria stood at the door for a moment, then slowly approached the bed. The sick woman carefully took the cat out of her bag, which had not surrendered a sound so far, and carefully placed it on Adriana's bed. The Marquise did not look back at the foreign walls. Immediately she lay down next to her mistress and began licking her hands. Maria was amazed at this instant foundation. My God! She whispered in reverential horror, the Marquise, and recognized her. And then the cat screamed. These sounds could not be called a horse. It was a wild one. Never had Marina heard a cry before either. As if the animal was tormented by terrible pains. Marquise was saying goodbye to her mistress in horror at these heart-rending moans of Marquise. Maria grabbed the cat tightly in an armful and rushed out of the room, then back down the corridor, down the stairs to the exit. Leaving behind her bewilderment, turmoil, and terror, she could no longer see the orderlies and nurses scrambling to the patient's room to see if she could get around on her own. To find the source of the terrible howl, paralyzed and instilled with animal terror. But what became known to her for certain was that Adriana had stopped breathing that very night. Very soon after their Marquesa and hasty escape from the hospital, and Maria, finally certain that it was absolutely right to give the opportunity to say goodbye to two loving each other's souls, human and feline. Then there was the funeral. There were only a small handful of attendants at the funeral ceremony, consisting of neighbors and a few of Worshipful's former co-workers. A young man in his 30s stood close to the casket. His face expressed genuine grief. Maria guessed that it was Andrew. As they began to disperse, Maria approached him to introduce herself and express her condolences. It was a pity that we had to get acquainted under such sad circumstances. She said, "Your aunt loved you very much." "Thank you, Maria," he said, shaking her hand with a light, musician-like movement. "Aunt Adriana was very comforted that you agreed to take care of her cat. She said she was completely at peace now." "Oh, really?" Maria was embarrassed. "It's not good of the Marquesa." "Will you let me visit her?" asked Andrew. "Yes, of course." Maria explained how to get to her from Adriana's house, where Andrew was to stay for the first time, and they said goodbye. At home, Maria sat for a long time without doing or thinking. The cat was already accustomed to meet her mistress at the door and waited patiently for her to separate. The girl went to the armchair, took Marcus in her arms. He would mumble some quiet words or hum some forgotten songs that suddenly came to mind. Such 5 minutes in the evenings became their custom. Marquise received the warmth of human hands, listened with pleasure to the soft female voice. Maria relaxed, stroking the white smooth, cat-like back, and listened to the purr of a non-animal. "Here we are left with you and me alone, Marquise," Maria told me quietly. "Your mother has left, but don't be sad. She's calmed down now. She's well, she's not in pain. And you and I will remember her with a kind word." A few days after Adriana's funeral, Andrew called. Maria invited him to visit, remembering his request to visit the Marquis. In the evening, she hastily set the tea table. There was no need to clean up for the guests' arrival. In the house at Maria Marquise always reigned perfect order. As if in the absence of the mistress, the cat diligently maintained cleanliness and coziness. Andrew came at the agreed time. He brought Marquise a big bag of cat treats and toys. Maria immediately at the entrance handed a luxurious bouquet of huge lilies, and she immediately put the fragrant flowers on the middle of the table. The cat treated the generous gifts favorably, even regally. with strokes of her paw and with, tried new balls, then settled down in its accustomed place and watched the pair, conversing still at the table with lovely eyes and a satisfied label. Meanwhile, Andrew took out a bottle of Prosecco. "Maria, what about you?" "Oh, you what?" "No, there isn't." Never had a need. The hostess was confused. She couldn't tell me that all these years she'd lived lonely without merry company. Frankly speaking, my evenings were no different from those of an old woman, a pensioner. Meanwhile, at work she was quite sociable and was quite attractive. "No way," said Andrew. "Decidedly, the straight line will be drawn. Problem solved. The bottle simply must be opened and drunk. I can't afford any weakness today. How can one not drink good wine with such a beauty on their first meeting?" Maria is lively and cheerful. America has introduced more and more new tools. Try a fork. Here's a knife. Oh, wait. I have a screwdriver. And she giggled, dragging the most valuable, in her opinion, tool that could only exist in the house of an old bachelor. Laughing at his own dexterity, Andrew managed to open the bottle by improvised means. Maria brought out the glasses. The first toast was to acquaintance. Both liked the wine. Then they drank, remembering the departed Adriana. Aunt Lena was only 48, a little less than Mom. Andrew said sadly, "She was my mom for the last few years. She called every day, sent me money, even clothes. She and Uncle Ed bought them for me without me. Aunt Adriana accurately guessed my size and my tastes, Edward. He was at the funeral." Maria asked, "No, I didn't call him." But their mutual coworkers said that he was away with the baby for some kind of baby checkup. You know, Maria, Aunt Adriana didn't say anything about him at the end of his illness. But I think she forgave him. She loved him very much and thought he deserved to be happy with a son, at least in his old age. I guess I'm a maximalist. I can't forgive Uncle Edward. I talk to him whenever I get the chance. I'd even understand to some extent what he did. But you know, Aunt Adriana, she was all straight and honest. No secret criminal anywhere for any money. She should have been happy from start to finish. But it's a cursed disease. I'm sorry we met her so late, Maria replied. I've always dreamed of having a friend. Adriana is older. All the more reason for me to be good to her. Oh, you just didn't see her, young Maria. She was like a light that lit everybody up. She was bright, you know, and she still had a wonderful life. Really, Maria looked up to him. And from what you remember, she gave herself to life to the fullest. That's great. But I always wondered if she was alone. I mean, she had friends, comrades, from way back. She remembered them so warmly. I didn't feel comfortable asking about it. But it was her choice. Maria, Aunt Adriana is a person with a great sense of dignity. Andrew spoke of Lena as if she were alive. When she got sick, she deleted herself from all social media. She stopped even answering her cell phone. She was determined she wasn't going to overshadow other people's lives. Let her friends not see her helplessly weak. And it was only for me that she had to make an exception after chemo. We've always been very close. How could she do without support? It was physically impossible. Andrew confirmed that he would be selling the apartment in 6 months. By law, he was only entitled to it after that period. But today, they felt so good that they didn't want to talk about business or anything sad anymore. Andrew and Marina sat up until almost dawn. It seemed to both of them that they had known each other for a very long time. It was amazing how much they had in common. Movies, favorite songs, poems. They even liked the same writers and poets. Saying goodbye, Andrew suddenly kissed Maria on the cheek. In the afternoon benefits during Maria's lunch break, he called her again. Maria, I was urgently called to work. I'm leaving tonight, and I was so looking forward to meeting you today. What can I do? He said pitifully, so let me come and see you off. Without a second thought, Maria blurted out, and she was very surprised at her own determination. Andrew rejoiced. Really, I wouldn't dream of coming. Come straight from work to my apartment. We'll have dinner together somewhere, and then we'll go to the train station. The evening was very short, but as wonderful as the previous light dinner. Farewell at the train station. And now Maria is home. Caring Andrew himself called and paid for a cab, so that the girl would not be alone on the deserted streets at night. A goodbye kiss completely turns Maria's head. "Marquesa, what shall I do?" said she to her shaggy-haired friend. "I like him so much. How can I live alone now?" Marquesa, reproachfully held in her arms, indignant. "Do you have me?" "Oh, you do." Maria's one life was now filled with a great bright feeling. She joyfully got up in the early morning, looked for her cat, ran to work, completely forgetting about her affairs. By the way, she used to exaggerate this flaw of hers. So Maria decided, looking at herself again and again in the big mirror in the hallway. Even though Andrew was not around, she was still expressing and expanding herself every day. She had to look 100% every minute now. And he called more than once a day, and their conversations were full of those hints, those innuendos that truly bring two people together. They had a life together. They're in the cloudy, ephemeral space that gives air to existence. Maria imagined Andrew beside her. Yes, not handsome he is, but so good. With his gorgeous smile, with his quick movements. And most importantly, he treats her so carefully, as if she were made of something beatable. Vasia anticipates her every move. One sunny and June day, the doorbell rang, expecting no one. Maria in a kerchief and an old robe came to open the sudden guest Andrew. Maria was confused and overjoyed. And here I am. She entered the room in which against custom reigned chaos. Maria decided to paste the wallpaper and freshen things up. In the back of her mind, she was waiting for Andrew to arrive. After all, it would soon be 6 months since Adriana's death. He would have to inherit the apartment. "Now I'll think of something for breakfast," she hurried after the first greetings. "No, Maria, I'm not going to let you do anything on the day I arrive. Get dressed. We're going to a nice place now." They left everything in the same disheveled state and went to a cafe owned by an old acquaintance of Andrew's. Juicy steaks, sparkling wine, fruit. Maria enjoyed everything and marveled at how much pleasantness and pleasure there was in life, and why she thought it wasn't all for her. Andrew opened to her small joys, but also became her great joy. "Do you like it?" he asked Maria lovingly, looking into her face while chewing grapes. Maria only mooed amusedly, showing that she was at the peak of pleasure. Andrew's visit had a practical purpose. He was going to sort out the paperwork. Maria's help in legal matters was just the right thing for him. In the afternoon, they worked well with the papers, made a plan to sell Adriana's apartment. "Honey, you may be wondering why I don't want to move there myself and live next to you," softly asked Andrew, removing from the branches of hair from Maria's neck. The girl was embarrassed. She actually, in the depths of her soul, had been melting the hope that he would do exactly that. And now she suddenly pictured him in the empty corners of the rooms where Adriana had spent so many sorrowful and agonizing months waiting to die. The hopelessness. Everything within those walls had been written by her. Sterile, even the apartment was without life. And despite the light from the large windows, the eerie feeling was so palpable that she didn't notice herself shrieking. No, Andrew, don't live there." He understood her impulse, for that was why he did not think of Adriana's dwelling as his own. "No, Maria, we will live quite differently. I'll do everything for you as you want just now." Maria was afraid. "But it would be worthwhile for a start for you," he poured over the courtier's sea in America, laughing at her confusion. "To marry me." Maria laughed. He waved his arms. And now he was already twirling her around the room, and she was laughing, hugging him by the neck. Scraps of old wallpaper were flung into the air too. And this strange salute was happening all by itself, in honor of their happy future union. On the window away from this ugliness sat Regal-Eye White Cat, and condescendingly Axe began Whiskers. What children these people are. In a few months, the young people bought a wonderful house and moved far away from the noisy city. Every evening, Maria had tea in the gazebo near the house. Andrew turned on the speakers and the couple listened to music. Magnificent Marquise always lay in the arms of the new mistress and peaceful purring.